Good morning, everybody. My name is Uzbekistans, and today I want to talk to you all about the ecological crisis faced by the Aral Sea and its implications to the Uzbek cotton industry. So last semester, I conducted a project in my history class, and the conclusion from this was that economic and agricultural identities impact the population's relationship with the past and the present. And after this, I wanted to look for other places outside of the United States as to where this connection can be found. And that led me to Uzbekistan. Because during the Soviet era, Uzbekistan was at the forefront of cotton production. What the Soviets did is that they saw the opportunity for making an industry of cotton within Uzbekistan, and cotton really became the white gold for the region. They had stockpiles of it, and it was incredible. Production went from being just a small percentage to being almost 90% of what the country was producing. But ultimately, cotton, yes, it did make the economy boom. It was great for the Soviets, but it's a water-intensive crop. So we went from this transition of seeing cotton as white gold to water becoming the blue gold for the region. And this led to my research question because I really wanted to figure out to what extent the Republic of Uzbekistan could sustain this water-intensive industry amidst the challenges posed by droughts, climate change, and other pressures that were seen at the time due to the shrinking of the Aral Sea. But before I can get into that, I want to draw your attention to this map. Because here we can see this is Uzbekistan, and on its northern border we have Kazakhstan. And if we zoom in, we can see a little bit more as to the Aral Sea and its basin. In Kazakhstan, we have the Sir-Darya River, because in this region there are only two main rivers that really sustain the sea, and Uzbekistan has the Amu Darya. This is how the sea was supposed to look like. This is what it looked like in the 1960s. And this is the northern segment in Kazakhstan and the larger southern Aral Sea in Uzbekistan. But as we can see here, it has changed dramatically. We've seen very large fluctuations, and this can be attributed to three main issues. First being irrigation practices in the region. Next is climate change, and also this idea of soil salinity. Because cotton requires a lot of water, like I said, and what a lot of people would end up doing is that they would use water from the Amu Darya River for this production, and this water would never find its way back into the Aral Sea. And it decreased the size of this ocean. And there was a lack of mitigation efforts, because as we'll see in the next slide, there were efforts in Kazakhstan, but Uzbekistan didn't have anything in place to address this issue. And climate change has been an iffy little subject within scholars because, yes, we have evidence that climate change is the thing. Global temperatures are rising in the region, but one of the scholars is Miklin, and he argues that climate change is good for Uzbekistan. Because as this glacial ice in the region begins to melt, there's additional water sources for the region because this ice will melt, more water. However, once this glacial ice disappears, this additional source of water is also going to disappear. And the Aral Sea will no longer be able to replenish itself as quickly as it once was. And then there's also soil salinity, because since there's a rise in temperatures and decrease in precipitation, we have more soil that is being left behind that is contaminated with high quantities of salt. So for the most part, we do have like your classic table salt sodium chloride, but we also have sodium sulfate and magnesium chloride in the region, which becomes toxic at the levels that you find in the region. It's so bad that $200 million American dollars of cotton production go to waste every single year because the fibers lose quality and they can no longer sell this on the market. And it's also cotton that is no longer being able to produce because of how bad the soil is. But I want you to notice here that in this southern segment, we see dramatic changes, but the north seems largely intact. And that's because right here at the mouth of the Sir-Darya River is the Coke-Aral Dam. This is an $85 million project funded by the government of Kazakhstan and the World Bank. It's a 13-kilometer dike and dam which essentially blocks off water flow from the south to the north, and it prevents this water from ever finding its way into Uzbekistan. It's kind of like a monopoly of the sea being held by Kazakhstan. And because there's no mitigation efforts in place in Uzbekistan, I wanted to structure my research in a way that I could identify whether Uzbekistan could sustain this industry looking forward. And I did this by looking into quantitative data and looking at what scholars have been saying to make sense of the numbers. And I'm going to talk about three different graphs that I created. Here's just a little bit of the breakdown of what where I got some of these numbers from. We will talk about climate data, land use statistics, and interbasin transfer. But this first one, I know, the numbers, it can be a little bit difficult to make sense of this, but for the purposes of today, I want to focus on the general trends. And some of the things that we are seeing in the region is that we're seeing increases in temperature because yes, it's getting hotter, and because of this, we're seeing increases in evapotranspiration. And combined with a decrease in precipitation that we've seen, especially in more recent years, where we've seen sharp declines, this leads to increases in droughts. And as we can see here, this talks about arable and agricultural land. And some of the things we've seen is that both of them have been on the decline, but when we look at what the scholars have said, we can make sense of these numbers by seeing that the decrease in arable land can be attributed to an increase in soil salinity. Because those increased rates of evapotranspiration means there's a lot of salt that is being accumulated because salt doesn't evaporate, so it just kind of sits there. And this affects the fertility of the soil. And as we've seen this increase in droughts, the lack of water in the region, we're also seeing a decrease in how much land is being able to use for agricultural purposes, hence cotton. And this last graph really brings everything together. We do have a few odd peaks in the data, but to really kind of slow down the data and make sense of it, I conducted a running mean, which really just looks at the midpoints to see the general trends of this. And when we look at those trends, we see that there has been, again, that decrease in precipitation can be attributed to the decrease in water flow, which was kind of the blue lines that we saw on the graph. Because this reduction in water flow is, again, the death of the Aral Sea. It's shrinking. And as we've also seen in the graph, there's a sharp decline in how much cotton is being produced in the region, and we can attribute this to the lack of arable land, the lack of fertile soil that can sustain this industry. And what this really brings about is there's a connection between the Aral Sea and the cotton economy, and it's not one way. It goes both ways. So cotton is water intensive, and this affects how much water finds its way into the Aral Sea. When you look at it from another way, the Aral Sea, as it's shrinking, this increases in soil salinity, this affects the cotton production. So there's a relationship between the two. They're interconnected no matter how you look at it. And the lack of mitigation efforts in the region ultimately exacerbates both of these issues because the USGS has gone as far as to say that Uzbekistan's South Aral Sea is a lost cause. Very little is being done to address the problems faced by this region. And ultimately, we can see ourselves in a future where the South Aral Sea will be no more. And ultimately, as the sea declines, so will cotton production in the region. But there's a little bit of hope. Because yes, this is very grim prospects for the region, but there are things that can be done. Going back to how I started this, cotton is essential to the cultural and social components of the region. You can't just remove this industry from them because of how long it's been there. It's a part of who they are. And you see it in what they produce, you see it in how they interact with the region, because even at the early start, they knew that this industry was going to bring their downfall. But they kept going with it, because it's the only thing they knew. However, because of this, we can't just cut them off. Instead, we can introduce a transitionary period into a future where there's more diversification in the region, where we can have more crops, but we can't just do this abruptly, and this is where genetically modified cotton comes in. Because once you introduce this into the region, it provides them with an additional source where they can extend how much time they have before they ultimately see the death of their industry. And here I do have a couple of variants listed, and these have been tried at a smaller scale in various universities across Uzbekistan, and they have proven to be high yielding, very high quality, and also drought resistant. So for future research, I would encourage other scholars in the region to kind of look into this at a larger scale and see whether it poses a long-term solution for Uzbekistan. But in the meantime, there are other efforts made in place because it's not just cotton, it's also the issue of, as the Aral Sea is evaporating, what are we going to do with all this salt? Salt mining isn't something that the region has really looked into because they're more concerned with the health issues and all of this agricultural malpractice and how this plays into the region. Every single year, 75 million tons of this toxic dust and salt finds its way into the region. And this produces several problems in the lungs, respiratory issues for the people. And because when you combine this with some of the other devastations that you see, drought, it leads to issues of food insecurity. So all of this ties together into providing kind of this storm of inevitable changes that keep perpetuating and keep making everything worse. And this is where the Green Nation Initiative comes in. This is a project that started last year, and it's funded by the government of Uzbekistan in partnership with various organizations of the United Nations. And their goal with this is to plant 1 billion trees over the course of the next couple of years. An afforestation effort in the desert basin that is being left by these areas that there was never any trees to begin there, but now we have all of the salt. What do we do with it? So rather than being able to use it for economic purposes, because that's really, they're not in a position to be able to do that right now, what they can do is that they can plant these trees to hold the soil down. And this prevents weathering, erosion, and prevents it from finding its way into other regions and posing other risks. However, trees use water. So if they can't manage how they're using this, it could eventually fail. That's why they're trying to collaborate with other organizations at an international scale to really solidify this plan in a way that everyone can benefit and reduce the risks that are associated with it. But ultimately, Uzbekistan is a prime example of how, again, these agricultural identities impact how the population interacts with it. And whether white or blue gold, Uzbekistan has always depended on different resources and it's become very tied to them. And we can't really address these issues that we've seen in the region without looking at that cultural component. So all we can really do at this point is hope that one day all of this will come together and we can see a brighter future for the Republic of Uzbekistan. Here are my references, and thank you.
Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more content from LSC-Kingwood.